Alright guys, how's it going? We're at that time of the year where we're once again anticipating a slew of new hardware releases, and we know this is true because of the various leaks supposedly leaking performance of the upcoming CPUs and GPUs. And this got me thinking, how can you tell the difference between a fake and a legitimate leak? So for this video, I will go through some of the thought processes which helps me analyse true or false. Now in the past, Silly Season was quite entertaining because we had both AMD and Nvidia graphics cards releasing around the same time. And this led to some fairly entertaining threads in technology forums throughout the web. Sadly this year though, it looks like only Nvidia will be releasing new graphics cards, so there won't be any AMD graphics discussion in this video. But I will start this analysis by looking back to AMD's Ryzen 2000 series, and one leak in particular which I focused on. It was over at Video Cards the first week in March, and they had found some leaked Ryzen 7 slides from over at El Chapuza's Informatico, and as you see there looks like there's an entire slide deck here, or at least quite a lot of slides. Now I read this, looked at it and thought, this is not impressive to me. And actually on the same day I released this video, the Ryzen 2000 series leaked a minor disappointment. Now I was somewhat surprised by some of the reaction to this. For example, a comment here saying you can always bet on me to see a full glass as half empty and a half full one as an empty glass. I'm reaching really hard to make a point that isn't there, and almost no mention of how dodgy or fake even half of the slides look. And this is one of my most sloppy content so far. Now I just decided to remember this comment for this purpose, but there were plenty more comments of that ilk, and I even had demands to delete the video. So I took, for me, an unusual step of justifying my reasons for this video. The comment goes, are the slides fake? Here's how I analysed it. First of all, there was far too much new information there for it to be a fake. For example, XFR2, Precision Boost Overdrive, Store MI, the Precision Boost Overdrive graph, a breakdown of the new AM4 features, and the slides also mentioned that only ASRock and BioStar had their BIOS prepared for Pinnacle Ridge. I actually only knew about BioStar having their BIOS ready, and there was also a slide mentioning CEC energy requirements. Now, I did mention that some of the slides did look a little bit grubby, and one of the main concerns about these slides was the dates hadn't been changed from last year's presentation. But I justified this in the video saying, look, this is AMD, this is probably internal AMD slides. They're not going to bother changing these dates around for something that is internal. They will do all that at the end when they release the slides properly. Simply put, it was very unlikely to me that anyone outside of AMD could just make up all of that information. And why cry over at Video Cards was getting a bit of hassle over these slides as well, and he was defending himself in his own comment section as well. He actually reached out to El Chapuza's and they were 100% sure that the slides were legit. And Why Cry also says a different source also confirmed to me that their sample is 105 watt TDP, the 2700X. For me though, it mostly came down to this. At least a large part of those slides were almost certain to be true, but we would know for sure when Precision Boost Overdrive and Store MI are confirmed or not on release. Store MI was quite a big one for me. That is just lame enough to be an AMD brand name. I'm sure many of you know what I mean by that, but as soon as I saw this Store MI thing, I just knew this is legitimate, this is coming out of AMD. Only they would go with such a lame brand, but this was a valid leak. It was all about the clock speeds really, and yes, the slides say 4.35 and 4.25 GHz, but given what we now know about XFR and Precision Boost Overdrive, how those two technologies work, that's not at all surprising. Looking at the 2700X, we can see that AMD has decided on a 4.3 GHz maximum boost clock. Now I did name this video a minor disappointment. As it ended up though, the Ryzen 2000 series is actually pretty decent. The lower latencies and faster memory really helped to close the gap with the higher end Coffee Lake chips in gaming. And perhaps not all of these slides were 100% legitimate, but in the end, this was clearly a valid leak. Now, a couple of weeks ago, over on Twitter, Tum Apisak, I've probably got that pronunciation hopelessly wrong, as usual, but he had discovered something pretty intriguing over on the Ashes of the Singularity benchmark. And we can still see it over at the Metaverse and the benchmark. An NVIDIA GeForce GTX 2080 Ti, special supply for GSS. We'll get to this part in a minute, but at first glance it appears that this user, Nagato, has got hold of a GeForce GTX 2080 Ti and uploaded a benchmark. Now, it didn't take long to figure out that the same Nagato profile also owns a GeForce GTX 1080 And we see it's still got the same i7, and in a different benchmark, same game version, but running Vulkan instead of DX12 probably shouldn't make that much of a difference, obviously. But same settings everywhere else, and pretty similar looking average frame rates compared to this supposed GTX 2080 Ti. 53.5 frame rate compared to 53.1, and a score of 5200 compared to a 5300 of the new architecture. Now, to me, that's a pretty red looking flag. However, it's looking kind of CPU bottlenecked, so maybe there's something in that. When analysing a leak like this, and with every other leak, it's not just about the one thing. You can't just look at one aspect and say, oh, this must be true, or this has to be fake. Building the big picture isn't really that difficult. And the thing here is, we already know that Nvidia's next series is the 1100 series, not the 2000 series. But what else do we know about Nvidia? We also know that they're very unlikely to launch a 2080 Ti first of all. In fact, Nvidia has forever been launching the 80 non-Ti. They launched the 280 first, they launched the 480 first, they launched the 680 first, although that wasn't a true 80 class GPU. Then they launched the 980, which again wasn't a true 80 class GPU, and then they launched the 1080, which again wasn't a true 80 class GPU. They haven't launched the biggest chip, the Ti chip, or the Titan chip, for a good 9 years, and the likelihood of Nvidia changing that is extremely slim. But wait a minute, what is this special supply for GSS thing? Maybe it's an early card for some company. And back over at Tumapisak, we can see that Hassan from WCCF, he's done a bit of digging and found this GSS, some CPU-GPU hybrid computing thing called, I don't know if that's GRUS or GRUS, sparse solver. So this could be a specially supplied graphic card for them if Nvidia did have a 2080 Ti, based on some 7nm chip presumably. If being sent out to the Pro segment, it would be a Quadro, and in a case like this, we're talking about a Tesla. But a specially supplied GeForce? I just don't think so, guys. So my conclusion here is, it's pretty curious, but 99% likely to be a fake. Now next up, and this one is real silly season stuff, with MSI dropping the first hint of AMD increasing AM4 CPU core counts. Now AM4 is of course the mainstream platform for CPUs like the 2700X. So currently that's a maximum of 8 cores or 16 threads on the AM4 mainstream platform. And this one was quite interesting, and with the B450 chipset motherboards ready for release, MSI released a video, with that video mentioning an enhanced layout and digital power design for 8 core and up CPUs. Now we already know that Threadripper will be increasing core counts from 16 to 32 cores, and we can be pretty certain that EPYC will increase core count to at least 48 cores and almost certainly 64, or maybe even more than that. So would it be any real surprise if AMD also increased the mainstream core counts to either 12 or 16? Now, you know I'm constantly talking about the chiplets thing and all that. Over at Semi-Accurate a week ago, and Charlie released this article, AMD's Rome is going to be a monster CPU. Now, unfortunately, it's behind a paywall. That's just how Semi-Accurate's business model works. And I don't have either subscription. Regarding the chiplet layout, from what I can gather, and I could be completely wrong on this, but what I can gather from reading elsewhere, it would appear that each chiplet will have 16 cores, obviously each CCX being 8 cores each. Now I'm not entirely sure how this will be laid out, if it's like the current CCX and just another one slapped on top of that. I've got no idea, I don't have the subscription. But from what I've read elsewhere, it does appear that each CCX will have 8 cores and each chiplet will have 16. And on the same day over at Chip Hell, this 16-core chiplet was also being discussed. And the Chip Hell forum is of course very famous for very accurate leaks. But what this really comes down to is, EPYC's probably going to be 64 cores, Threadripper's going to be 32, why not 16 for Ryzen? That's going to be one 16-core chiplet, Threadripper's going to be 2, and EPYC's going to be 4. It's exactly what we've got right now, except double the core count. So this was no great shock to me, and I'm pretty sure it's not a huge shock to most of you. 16 and 12 cores on the desktop next year, guys. Just how far have we come in 2 years? And given that the video is no longer available, I would say this lends even more weight to the theory. And a very simple conclusion that this is very likely to be a legit leak. And I'll also be quite surprised if this doesn't mean 8-core, 16-thread APUs. But that's one for a future video. Now, a couple of days ago over at Overclocker's UK forum, and a leak of an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1170. This one apparently was seen on a Polish forum, and this supposed leak was in 3D Mark Firestrike, and performance just slightly ahead of a GeForce GTX 1080 Ti. Now for a GTX 1170, that's some pretty interesting performance. Now this is a photograph taken on a phone, but we can see this GTX 1170, which is an EVGA version, and it appears to have 16GB of VRAM with a 2.5 GHz core clock and a 2.5 GHz memory clock. So obviously some pretty high clock speeds there, and we know that there's no way the 16nm process can clock this high. But of course we're not expecting 16nm for the 1170, it's either going to be 12nm or 7nm, with the smart money being on 12, and really this is what it comes down to. Over at TSMC's website we can see that they are lumping 16 and 12nm technology together, and they state that both 16 and 12nm are 50% faster and consuming 60% less power at the same speed. That's compared to the 20nm. So this move to 12nm technology did not improve clock speed. So for this 2.5 GHz clock speed to be true, this GeForce GTX 1170 would have to be 7nm. Just how likely is that though? Well, we already know that AMD will be releasing their 7nm Vega Instinct at the tail end of this year. And that was around 360 square millimeters of silicon. But these Vega Instinct cards sell for thousands of dollars while being very low volume. A graphics card like a GTX 1170, this will ship millions of units. So early on the process, it would be absolutely pointless to release such a graphics card. And if they did, the cost would be extremely high. Which leads on nicely to the next red flag, this 16GB of VRAM. This was probably the biggest red flag because the 70 class of GPUs need to hit a certain price point. That one's not rocket science. Cheaper graphics cards do sell better than more expensive cards. To a certain degree that is. We do see the GTX 1060 ahead of the 1050 Ti, but then we see the 1070 a little bit down, and then the 1080, and then the 1080 Ti. The overall picture should be clear. The less expensive cards do outsell the more expensive cards by quite some distance. Sticking on 16GB of VRAM onto this card, it makes no sense whatsoever. It would simply be a huge increase in the overall card price, which Nvidia would have to meet if they wanted to keep this 1170 class GPU at around the same price. But the problems with this one don't end there. We can see up here a valid result, which you will only see with a proper driver, and we do actually see the driver version is down here, which I believe is the June GeForce driver. And had this been using a pre-release driver, this GTX 1170 would show up as a generic VGA. To put it simply, there is far more evidence of this being a fake than a legitimate leak. And as others in the tech press pointed out, as we see here with the GTX 2080 Ti again, and here with an NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1, and a score of over 9,000, it's pretty easy to fake a Firestrike score. There's only one logical conclusion here, and that is that this leak is a fake. And the last one I'll be looking at today are Intel's upcoming 9000 series processors. The big news here is the i9, and Intel finally catch up with AMD on the desktop with 8 cores and 16 threads. And there was another leak 3 days ago at Kulaler's Chinese forum, another forum that is infamous for leaked processor information. And a user there had leaked the specifications of the upcoming CPUs. We've got an i9 9900K, an i7 9700K, and an i5 9600K. Now as you might imagine, the flagship, 8 cores, 16 threads, 3.6 GHz base clock, and a 5 GHz turbo clock. And that 5 GHz is over the first 2 threads. Possibly even more strange though, 4.7 GHz all-core turbo, and Intel claims a TDP of 95 watts. That will be 95 watts at 3.6 GHz. At 4.7 GHz, I'm pretty sure you're looking at 200 watts of power here. Possibly even more intriguing was the i7, the 9700K. And now starting all the way back from the i7 2600K, that was back in 2011. Performance was 4 cores and 8 threads. because this was a hyper-threaded CPU. 3770K, again you had the same doubled number of threads. Same with the 4770K, 5775C, 6700K, 7700K, and finally once they moved up to 6 cores and 12 threads, the 8700K. All these i7 processors have hyper-threading, but in this leak over at Kulala, the suggestion was Intel is ditching hyper-threading. Still a 3.6 GHz base clock and a 4.9 GHz turbo, and ComputerBase has put the whole table together here. There's a couple of things I want to say about this. Now over on my Patreon Discord, I've been chatting with some of the guys about this for the past few months in fact, and something I had predicted was Intel will pull out all the stops this time around. No more messing around with toothpaste, they will go full out on performance. So these 5 GHz numbers, yeah, I was expecting that, and I also fully expected soldered CPUs, but I did not like this 8 cores, 8 thread rumour at all, and this was actually enough for me to break one of my rules, the one earlier about not relying on one piece of information. I disliked this so much that I was ready to declare this entire rumour a fake. I did not like the idea of Intel ditching hyperthreading on their i7, not after so many years. And I'm speaking in past tense because I almost had this video ready for release yesterday, but I didn't quite get this part finished. As it turns out, I've been quite lucky with that, because had the video been finished yesterday, I would have been wrong. Only a few hours later last night, over at the Sandra benchmark, we indeed see a benchmark of the i7-9700K with 8 cores and no hyperthreading, and we also have a base clock of 3.6 GHz. So this appears to be true. Intel is abandoning hyperthreading on their i7s, and this may just be hindsight, but now it makes perfect sense to me. Intel's going to want this i9-9900K to easily beat the 2700X. And it will. It won't do it at 95 watts though, this is a pure fantasy, but it should be a fairly clearly fastest mainstream desktop CPU. I think the lines between mainstream and enthusiast are pretty blurred these days. But now the i7-9700K, you're looking at the new gaming champion here. We've already seen from the i5-8600K, which does not have hyperthreading, but still hangs in really well up against the 8700K in the vast majority of games, because currently most games are still only really scaling as far as 6 threads. By moving to 8 cores, no hyperthreading, Intel still keeps an obvious segmentation there. This 9900K is going to cost a lot of money. The 9700K won't be cheap. I doubt you'll be able to pick one of these up at around the same price as the 8600K, for example, so I wouldn't be thinking about it in those terms. But with 8 cores, no hyperthreading, you effectively are looking at an i5 on steroids. It's going to game really, really well, this CPU. It will be faster than the 8700K. Those 8 real cores should be just about better than 6 cores, 12 threads. But yeah, this one's going to be a really nice gaming CPU, and this is your productivity chip. So with that hindsight in place, it did make some kind of sense. And as I mentioned earlier, their new K-series CPUs will be soldered. Intel are indeed pulling out all the stops here to put the Ryzen 2000 series back in its place. And analysing that fact was extremely easy, because this will be Intel's last victory on the desktop. But at least they'll go out with a bang. Looking at these clock speeds on this i9 though, I hope it's not a literal bang like the one Hardware Unboxed got with their 7800X last year. But that's me done with this one. Things have been picking up a little bit again. I've been getting videos out at a slightly increased rate. I'm also working a lot on stuff behind the scenes. There was some pretty interesting news on the financial markets yesterday, with AMD reporting their biggest profit in 7 years. Intel will be reporting their financials tonight, and I expect to see very good results from them as well. So I'll try to get a video out on this at some point, perhaps near the beginning of next week. For now though, don't forget the usual like and subscribe. Check out my links, my Amazon links and all that stuff in the video description below, and I'll catch you later guys.